Thank you very
I
much.
want to dig into the details. As a matter of fact, I'd love to have you slide.
Absolutely, yeah, I'll send you the whole thing. He was asking me about artillery, and I know that one school is originally Gourdin.
Does that work? Okay, what this is a cutout of the 1780 Faber map to show you where we're talking about as far as Mayhem and Gourdin County are concerned. This is what we're really interested in. We know he did a lot of things, but you know, obviously the Mayhem we look for is the tower guy, and that was down here at Fort Watson. You're now right up above the Pocatello, right up in here. Since we have time, and this is just a general question and answer period, this particular map we got a hold of down in Charleston a few years ago, and I thought, well, that's really neat. 1780, it really ought to be accurate. And Karen and I were messing around one day with it, and we came to the conclusion, and I don't remember whether it's which one is off, latitude or longitude, but one is off 1 full degree, and the other one is off 7 minutes. So we don't know whether they purposely did that, or they were just bad map makers.
It's a British map, right?
It is a British map. Okay, if you have, has everybody been down to the Santee National Wildlife Refuge and seen the Indian Mound? Anybody not been there? Okay, we ought to go.
Before you leave Clarendon County, you need to go to down I-95 to exit 102 and see the Santee Indian Mound, because that's where Fort Watson was built on top of.
And a couple of things to remember is we did a reenactment down there, and we knew how many reenactors we were going to have, so we tried to scale it so that we couldn't use the Indian Mound. We had to put Fort Watson down here in the flat country. But we wanted to scale it with hay bales so people could get an idea of what it was. This is 15 yards across here, 45 feet on the side, and they had 120 people in there. So when we put the little hay bales down here, and the British had 4 guys to simulate the 120, and when we scaled it down, they were standing just about shoulder to shoulder in the thing. As you can tell, if that's 45 feet, that's probably somewhere between 24 and 30 feet tall. And this apparently is a copy of or a picture of the tower that they reproduced for the bicentennial. You know, the Lossing that came down here and toured around in the 1840s, I believe it was, and made sketches and so forth. He put a bio in there about Lossing, and he described the marker and all that. And that, in fact, and I'm sure Keith will talk more about that, it's on a gentleman's land down there, and he only lets them access it once a year, if I remember correctly. But you can ask Keith about that. This is a page out of the orderly book, and again, Keith has a whole lot more on that. This is a marker at his plantation, and I think I have the words here. No, I don't. I have them over at the computer there. If somebody really wants to know what it reads, I can read it to you later. Yeah, there would be time then for Keith to come up and read about the feeding of the warrant.
y'all can't believe everything George says. I guess you know that by now.
Keith, move the microphone out. You can barely hear you.
If I hold it, is that better?
Yep.
One of the stories that I really liked, and I got to digging into it because I thought maybe, just maybe there might have been some underlying thoughts that had not been included on the story. And here's what I found. This is a synopsis of it. It's not the whole entire thing, but it's, I kind of made a little summary here that you might enjoy. How many of you have heard the story about the Mayhem requiring the deputy to eat the warrant? Nobody's ever heard of that? Just a few of them. Okay. Well, here's what I got written. Another of the more romanticized events historians have mulled over was the serving of the subpoena on Colonel Hezekiah Maham by Deputy Sheriff Peter Horn of Charleston District on September 3rd, 1784. What should have been a routine task turned into a rather frightening affair for the deputy. Can you all hear me pretty good? Rather than accepting the papers, Maham forced the deputy to eat the parchment. Despite the incident's fame, much pertinent information preceding the day's event has failed to surface. The controversy began in the summer of 1784 when Dr. James Lyon sued Marion. The colonel had neglected to pay his medical bills and also, as executive of the estate of John Cook, had refused to pay Cook's bills. During the Revolution, Lyon served the Patriot cause as a military surgeon. However, he was one of many individuals caught up in the tides of war when Charleston fell in 1780. According to his own account, Lyon had intended to flee to Philadelphia, but he learned that his son was a British prisoner of war. Staying on under British occupation, he received a magistrate's commission, which he later claimed was accepted under duress and not filled in. When the legislature convened in 1782, Lyon was placed on the confiscation list along with others who had accepted British commissions. And as a result, when he petitioned the legislature for relief in March of 1784, his estate was restored to him. Hezekiah Maham had a very different experience in the Revolution, holding both military and political positions throughout the war. He served both valiantly and controversially as a colonel under Francis Marion and Nathaniel Greene. Near the end of the war, he was a member of the legislature that had confiscated Lyon's estate. When Lyon initiated his suit, debtors throughout the state felt the press of a variety of post-war problems, creating enormous pressures on these debtors. Thus, Maham was not alone in his outrage at creditors. It is unclear whether or not Maham was able to pay his debts, and there is no doubt about his unmitigated hatred for Dr. Lyon. As a result of the deputy who tried to serve the rich, Maham set an example of resistance for other harassed debtors to follow. Because of Maham's prominence, his abuse of the deputy became an important criminal matter. Maham temporarily eluded arrest, but later posted bail and then refused to appear at his trial. In June of 1785, the Court of General Sessions sentenced Maham to 3 months in jail, fined him £100, and put him on 7 years probation with a very large bond. Maham was outraged and appealed to Governor Benjamin Girard. The governor commuted the jail term and referred him to the General Assembly for further relief. At a special session in September 1785, the legislature heard a lengthy and articulate defense petition presented by Francis Marion on Maham's behalf. Adanus, or Adanus, I don't know how you pronounce that, it's A-D-A-N-U-S, Burke, one of the judges who had sentenced Maham, was not the sort of man who would let Maham's accusations stand unchallenged. Noted for his quick temper, Burke combined this trait with a sense of fairness and a lifelong contempt for privilege. Burke had opposed the confiscatory retribution enacted by the Jacksonboro Assembly, so on March 2nd he submitted to the Senate the memorial in which he requested permission to defend himself. After quite an ordeal between the judge and both House and Senate, the House concurred with the Senate, and Maham had his fine refunded and his bond returned. Maham's actions have been found very reprehensible, as he had been carried away by a gust of passion, quote unquote. After all said and done, he had apologized for his behavior. And then the story goes on. Marion had died as he lived on a plantation in South Santee. Marion, as you probably know, lived and died right in Pineville. What is Pineville now? It wasn't Pineville until 1794. But his monument that you saw a picture of is about a mile from my house, right in the center of Pineville. Like George said, it's privately owned right now, and the guy will not, he will not let anybody own the property, to make it short. Any questions? Maybe I can answer something that you might have.
Keith, let me just take it over a minute and run over some other stuff on it. Just to get you thinking in a more positive light. Well, what we remember Mayhem for is, like I said earlier, is the tower. And it was a result of the siege of Fort Watson. And you remember that Marion had done the Bridges campaign, was sort of out of food and ideas and ammunition and all that. And he met up with Light Horse Harry Lee that General Gourdin had sent down here. And they met on the Black River on April 14th, 1781. And they decided that the best place to start carrying out General Greene's orders was to go take Fort Watson. When they got there, they didn't have a cannon. They didn't have a cannon at the fort either, fortunately. They sent for the cannon. It, as I understand it, went to Georgetown. So they still didn't have a cannon. Mayhem came up with the idea of building the tower, which they did. And if you go down there and visit, as you walk from where you park toward the Indian Mound, over on the right-hand side is a real dense brush. If that were cleared, you would see a start of a second Indian Mound about 6 feet tall. And it would be my guess that that's where they probably put the tower. But the matches were what the archaeologists found when they studied where the bullets came into the fort. So anyway, they did that, and when they started shooting early in the morning, the British Lieutenant McKay quickly surrendered. Marion let them take their baggage and go away and kept their weapons and food. The marker up here, the inscription on it says, "A burial place for Colonel Hezekiah Maham, a native of St. Stephen's Parish, Berkeley County, South Carolina, born in 1739, died in 1789. He was a distinguished soldier and patriot of the American Revolution." And I think quite often, people end up being remembered for something such as feeding the thing, as opposed to the warrant, as opposed to what they really did that really made it worthwhile.
George, that marker is located right on the edge of the highway. You can see that marker, and you can read it. It's right on the what they call it Mayhem Drive. It's what used to be a part of old Highway 6 that runs takes off of Highway 45 and goes down to Highway 52 on that stretch of the road right there. It's Mayhem Drive, and that marker is available to anybody. They can see it. It's right on the edge of the road. I keep it sprayed so that it doesn't get thrown up with bushes and stuff.
Keith, how about explaining about the problems of maintaining this marker?
This monument, as you probably know, was put there by one of the descendants of Colonel Marion, and his name was Joshua John Ward, who was at one time Lieutenant Governor in the state of South Carolina. He has relatives, a lot of his relatives are in the Georgetown, Morrow's area. This wrought iron fence that is around the Maham gravesite it contains not only Colonel Maham's grave, but also his daughter Mary and his wife Mary. And it is suspected, and I really believe that there are other graves that we don't know who are buried there, but we feel certain that there are other graves also within that wrought iron fenced area, because it's a pretty good little sized graveyard. It was a family graveyard, and it's very close to where his house was. And of course, his house was destroyed by fire many years later. But this monument was placed there by Joshua John Ward. One of the major concerns I have had for quite a number of years is, if you notice look at it real close to this picture, which that thing says is bio from Lossing, but it looks very familiar to the picture that I took just a few years ago, probably 10 or 15 years ago, when it was in a lot of vines growing everywhere, and some bushes and stuff. And if you look at the top section of that monument, it's twisted a little bit from the bottom. And the reason being is somebody went there at some point in time and tried to take that monument apart. Somebody had told them that there was all kinds of good, valuable stuff down in there. They were going to disassemble it. And they didn't make it, thank the Lord, but it is twisted on the top there. Also, you can't see it by this photograph, but down at the base of the monument, that monument is actually cracked all the way through, all the way around. And so if trees or branches or limbs or something were to hit it just right, it could topple it over very easily. Fortunately, it's big enough that it has a lot of weight to it. And so that's one of the reasons that it's still upright as it is. George was saying, the condition of it. I've been trying to do what I can each year. The guy won't let me in there, even though I have a legal right. I have got, what do you call it, Charles, when you get permission from through the Senate. I've got legal access to act on that person's behalf, one of his descendants that I have found, and she's given me that authority, but he still makes it so hard that the only thing I can do is walk in there once a year. He makes me do it in the middle of July, and it's really hot, and you can't drive to it. But anyway, I've been trying to take care of it as best as possible just to, and it does look better than it does right in that picture, but it's a project to try to maintain it. We had hopes that one of these days that maybe something will happen and we'll be able to go in there and have not only a public access, or even if it's limited public access, the way we can do a much better job in trying to maintain the area. Any questions?
Who designed that monument? It looks like Robert Mills, looks like something he would design.
It doesn't have a name on the bottom as to, I don't have that information. I would have to think that it was probably somebody from the Georgetown area where Joshua John Ward was living at that time. And that was in 1845.
Craig, you might speak to that one.
Looks like Robert Mills.
Anything else?
Do you happen to know if Mayhem received any kind of promotion for coming up with the idea of building the fort, the tower?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, I know that he worked his way up, to colonel, but I don't know if that his Maham Towers had anything to do with that promotion or not. I know that he was commended quite a bit for that, and there have been battles since then that the Mayhem Tower term and those towers, that type of tower was used as fortification.
You said that he died in 1789? Is that correct?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, do you know how he died?
No, I don't. I think it was ill. I know he had been ill for quite some time. After the last battles that were down in Berkeley County, he had gone home sick and had been real sick, and I think it was not too many months after that he died. Oh, well, not months, it was several years after. But I don't think he ever recouped completely, evidently, and must have just died from, I don't know what. It's a good question, though.
Keith, over here. Keith,
Yeah.
do you know much about Mayhem before he became one of Marion's men? Did he have prior military experience? Was he related to Marion in any way because they were both Huguenot? Can you tell us something about him before he pops up in Marion's brigade?
I don't know that he was related. I don't, according to my genealogy, he was not, but then again, it depends on how deep you want to go. His father, we know who his father was, and with his mother, we don't know who she was. As far as when he had his first military experience, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was during the Cherokee War, during that time period. But now, how he got started and all, I don't know. I have not found that information. I've done on everything that I could find about him. But I have virtually no information on that.
Keith, do you want to say anything about the orderly book?
Probably Charles can answer that and talk about that maybe more than I can. A lot of that information concerning the orderly book, David Nealon, who a lot of you know, provided me some information on that, and I think that that's going to be something that he's got coming down the pipe at some point. Isn't that true, Charles, as far as you know?
That's on how long.
Let's say we hope so. But I think there's some of it it's available that you can find, and I Thank you, Carol. Indiana's got these different libraries that have some of those records as far as, and possibly you could find one, you know, if it's on the website, there's websites that have that, if you punch in Mayhem Monument, it should come up. A lot of that information is available on the website.
I wanted to provide just a little more information on Mayhem's rank. I have one source writing about the siege of Fort Watson where they refer to him as Major Mayhem. So that's April 1781. He soon is, raising his own regiment of light dragoons, and he's lieutenant colonel at that point. Whether the tower idea got him promoted, he was obviously a talented military man, absolutely trusted lieutenant of Francis Marion. And so I suspect that it was a combination of his skills as a horseman, his skills at guerrilla warfare, if you will, or irregular warfare, asymmetric warfare. He was recognized as a leader of man, able to go off on his own and get things accomplished. The other thing besides the rank thing that I found interesting about him is he was actually captured at his home when he was sick. I believe it was in August of 1782. And so he set out the rest of the war waiting to be exchanged. He was paroled. Most of those guys had malaria. And, being in camp, if one person's got malaria, this mosquito comes by, bites them, and they go bite their neighbor, and pretty soon everybody's got it. It's relapsing, remitting. When you're having an acute attack, it put Peter O'Reed in bed a good bit, and I suspect that that's what Mayhem had. He had malaria because so many people before and after the war had malaria in South Carolina. And that would explain why he was home in bed and how he got himself captured toward the end of the war. Whether he died of malaria, ultimately it can certainly kill you, especially if you have anything else wrong with you. And my guess would be that contributed, although that's Charles Baxley's speculation as opposed to fact.
Keith, I don't know if anybody's ever seen anybody with malaria. I don't know if you've ever seen anybody with malaria, but I was actually hunting in Africa, and my white hunter came down with malaria. And he was in bed for about 4 days, and you have never seen anybody so sick. The sweat was pouring off of him. He must have lost 30 pounds. It is absolutely debilitating. It's hard for us to imagine just how sick you can be to see what malaria can do to somebody.
I found one note in here adding to answer what Kieran had asked about his rank. In 1776, Hezekiah Maham was elected a captain in the 1st Rifle Regiment under Colonel Isaac U.G. and served during the siege of Savannah and the Battle of Stone. A little tidbit of information that I have put together about him personally. I said he was born in St. Stephen's Parish on June 26, 1739, and died there in 1789. In early manhood, he was an overseer for the Saintler family of St. John's Parish, Berkeley. Later a planter at his own plantation, Mayhem, in St. Stephen's Parish. He was a tax collector in 1767. He was elected a member of the 1st and 2nd Provincial Congresses, St. Stephen's, in 1775 and 76. In the House of Representatives, St. Stephen's, 1781 and 82, 83 and 84, and declined in the election in 1784. And then the Senate, St. Stephen's, representing St. Stephen's in 1786 and 89, where he died. He was a delegate to the State Convention to ratify the Federal Constitution in 1788. He was a Justice of the Peace, a member of the Santee Jockey Club, and incidentally, I might just add too, something that's always been interesting to me, come to find out, where my father built his house was where Pineville Racetrack was built. And it was designed and laid out by Colonel Hezekiah. Well, he wasn't Colonel then, well, I guess, no, he wasn't. Yes, he was. He was Colonel then. Colonel Hezekiah Maham. And we think about 1785, somewhere along in that area, is when the Pineville Racetrack was built. And I got an old map at the house in my library that shows a picture of it, and I was very interested. It was interesting for me to find out that when I took the map down to my GIS guy at Berkeley County, I said, how about measure this race course and see how long, what the size of this racetrack was. Sure enough, it was 1 mile, it was a 1 mile track. I thought that was quite interesting, and especially for the fact that having learned about the interest that he had in horses, Hezekiah Maham loved horses, evidently, very much so. And so that was another tidbit of information that I found out about his life.
As most of you know, Patrick O'Kelly did a orderly book publication on Marion. A guy that did a lot of research on that, if anybody is researching him, is not already aware of him, is Doyle R. Harper. And we have the address for him. And he, I think, did the first work on the Marion book, and he may have some stuff. Yes, I'll be right back. While I'm walking back here, the DAR came up with a thing to try to go and find all the graves of the patriots in the Revolution. And I was recruited to go along and be the snake chaser or the sweeper of things in Clarendon County. And it's sort of sad to see the state like this one that Keith is working on of all the graves of these patriots. And you know, I think everybody understands when you go into law enforcement or you go into the military, you're basically signing a paper there that says you'll give everything if it's required of you for your country and your fellow people. And these guys did the same thing and gave everything. I mean, their bank accounts, their plantations, the whole thing, and basically for nothing. I mean, they weren't getting paid. Most of them came out of the war broke. And the way you walk around and see, you know, how we let these sites go into disrepair. And here in Clarendon County, we can get you within rifle shot of where the sites were, where the stuff happened. But, you know, we can't pin it down. And if our generation doesn't do it, I don't know that the next generation's got a chance.
Yeah, on Mayhem, at least as far as he relates to Marion, I think besides the Mayhem Tower, the other major subject in which they interrelate is this huge dispute between Mayhem and Peter O'Ree over rank when both were named to head up regiments of cavalry. Nathaniel Reed wanted a couple regiments of cavalry that would be more had more definite terms of service than the militia, and O'Ree and Mayhem were both picked to head those up. The problem was their commission was dated the same day, and they had a huge back and forth between the two of them over which one was really higher ranking. Marion sort of got into the middle of it and tried to mediate the dispute, not terribly successfully, because Mayhem would write letters to O'Ree and saying, you know, I'm not going to take orders from you, and O'Ree would write to Marion saying, I'm not going to take orders from him, and Marion would try to get Greene to intervene, and Greene didn't want any part of it, and it was a really huge mess. But interestingly, in the end, when they reduced those two regiments down to one, Greene and John Rutledge told Marion, well, you decide between Mayhem and Ori as to who's going to head up that single cavalry unit. And Marion actually recommended Mayhem for the job, even though he had a stormy relationship with Mayhem. And Ori ended up being, Marion said, you can go head up the infantry at Georgetown. And Ori, it really destroyed the friendship for a while between Ori and Marion. Ori felt that Marion had stabbed him in the back by recommending Mayhem. They eventually patched things up. But the whole thing, it went on, year and a half, this three-ring circus between Marion, Mayhem, and Ori. And it makes for interesting reading if you ever want to read all the correspondence. It's a lot of name calling in that.
I may add too, during that time period and here recently, I was blessed, I guess you could say, with the opportunity to start a Sons of the American Revolution chapter for Berkeley County. And I'm pretty much convinced, I think my members, or at least they took a lead in agreeing that we would name our chapter the Colonel Hezekiah Maham chapter, which we did. So we do have a chapter under that name for Berkeley County. And incidentally, one of the things that I contributed to naming him, having his name as our chapter name was because of the fact that there's documented at least 11 different actions that were in Berkeley County that Hezekiah Maham was involved with. George, you got something else over there?
I just want to follow up on the answer to that, John Oler, is that right? Oler? Your comments. And of course I was aware that Ori and Mayhem had this feud, etc. But what I'm not sure of is, did Mayhem get along well with the other, I guess, colonels and majors that served under Francis Marion? Does anyone know?
No, you know it. I don't have any information on that. Everything that I know of, that was the big problem was between him and Ori.
In all the stuff I've looked at, I've never seen a conflict between Mayhem and anyone else. And I know that he had a fiery personality, and some of his juniors may have rubbed him wrong, but I've never seen any evidence that he got into any of these squabbles. The big one was over who was going to command the combined cavalry regiment. So I don't know of any others. I do know that he was highly respected by his peers, and he served in the General Assembly, as Keith had said. He served in the Senate with Francis Marion. He and Marion remained lifetime friends. As Keith said, I had never heard this before, that Marion rose to his defense in the Senate when they were passing a bill for his personal relief. And so I think that says a lot. Ori was probably not a great athlete, and to roam around hundreds of miles countryside, camping every night and being a horseman, you probably really need to be good at that. I don't think Ori could swim, for instance. And so by putting Ori in charge of garrison duty at Georgetown and having the combined regiment commanded by Mayhem probably made a lot of sense. But it didn't make sense to Ori.
I could just.
But what about Ori? Did he get along with the other subordinates then?
I can add a little bit to that. I think one of the reasons Marion picked Mayhem over Ori to lead the remaining regiment is that Mayhem's, he was a better discipliner than Ori was. Ori had trouble keeping his own men in line.
Ori had trouble keeping his own men in line, and I think Mayhem's men were a little more loyal to him than Ori's were to Peter. So Marion, being big, disciplined man himself, I think, saw that as a virtue in Maham, and I think that played a part in his decision.
Somebody who's almost even more important is Ori was not a good horseman. He lost a number of horses because he simply was not a good horseman. And the thing that you need most as a cavalryman is to be able to ride a horse. So the other thing is Ori had been trained as a merchant before the war, and it made sense to put him in charge at Georgetown, where there's a tremendous flow of commerce coming through Georgetown at this point in time that was feeding the entire Continental Army in the South. So Ori had the right skills to be at Georgetown. He did not have the right skills to command horse troops. And I think that was part of it. The other thing is I think Marion thought that as the British were conscripted to Georgetown, that the infantry command would be more important. If you actually look at a formal siege of Georgetown, infantry would be more important. He didn't think of his placing Ori at Georgetown as a demotion, but I think Ori thought of it that way.
We'll have more time later on to consider any of this. Let Keith make his closing comments.
I just wanted to tell you one little bit more about Mayhem that I found to be very interesting. I know all of you have heard of Carolina gold rice. All of the rice experts, if you will, have not proven it to be for sure, but there's quite a bit of speculation that Hezekiah Maham was the guy that introduced Carolina gold rice in the state of South Carolina as we know it today. There were two on an old plat that I have of Mayhem and Richmond Plantation, which Mayhem was incorporated into in later years. There were two rice fields on that plantation, and Mayhem is supposedly the guy that started. Nobody knows where he got his seed. That's one of the things that we've tried to determine, but we've been unable to do that. But Carolina gold rice could be contributed to one of his, put another feather in his cap. Thank you.